This is the Hagmann Hagmann Report for today. It is a fabulous Friday edition. It is a live broadcast. Today is the 18th day of July 2014. I'm Doug Hagmann, along with my co-host, my son, fellow investigator, fellow researcher Joe Hagmann. Together we are the Hagmann Hagmann Report. Folks, you're about to hear just a fantastic program tonight. 3 hours of unbiased, uncensored news, information, and analysis. Shall we say actionable intelligence tonight? For new listeners, I want to thank each and every one of you for checking in. You're listening to the only show where the news is presented to you in a 3D format. We look beyond the headlines and bylines, bring you the news behind the news. We are working on getting some 3D glasses and working on doing some interesting things, using having the glasses part of actually a special publication. More on that later. We can only do so much, but I'll tell you what, we're putting it into overdrive. We're resurrecting certain things and putting some things together. Folks, you're going to see the results of our efforts here in the short term. The reason, of course, is because time is indeed short. For the new listeners, we broadcast live each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern. Our home base on the internet is HomelandSecurityUS.com. And we're also simulcast by the Christians United Broadcasting Network. There, tune us in at the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. Thank you for deliberately tuning in to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, the Hagmann and Hagmann Radio Network, Truth Network, Watchmen Unleashed, whatever. I'll tell you what, a couple of things very quickly. Folks, I did write... I did appear last night on Coast to Coast AM. It was about 1 o'clock this morning, my time, or 1:05 my time, in the morning after our show, and then, of course, a previous 3 hours of radio. So 6 hours of radio and then a little blurb on Coast to Coast AM. And just felt great about it, talking about the airliner. Ladies and gentlemen, I have an investigative report or an article on HomelandSecurityUS.com, and thank you, CanadaFreePress.com, for also posting that and allowing comments as well as discussion. That's CanadaFreePress.com, Flight 17, Panorama to Peril. And if you have a chance, folks, read that. Give me your thoughts on it, or best yet, put your thoughts in the discussion section at CanadaFreePress.com. Joe, welcome.
Glad to be here. And one thing that you did this week that we got in the mail today, which I'll post a picture of tomorrow on Facebook, and I'll send it to you. Maybe you want to post it on the website, is our new bumper stickers or car stickers. And they're pretty good. They're 3-inch circles, and it looks really good on my wife's car, so I'm gonna snap a picture of it. I'll send it to you, Dad, and you can post it up on the website if you want, or just post a picture of the sticker. But I'll put one up on Facebook, I guess. Send it out over the app.
Yeah, they're circular. They are unassuming, and what they are meant to do, as far as here was my plan, our plan. You put them on your window, maybe, or even your bumper. I mean. What these are, it's bumper sticker material that is supposedly not supposed to damage the finish of your car, but more and more people are wanting to kind of identify with those who think alike or think like them. And if you listen to this program, chances are, unless you're members of the Muslim Brotherhood, the federal government, the NSA, DHS, which we've got those, but unless you're them, you perhaps want one of those on your vehicle. Now, some people say, I would never do that because that identifies me as,
I've never put any bumper stickers on my car ever. This is the first one I've ever had.
Yeah, and I haven't either. Well, no,
and
I
it doesn't look
back.
bad either. Some bumper stickers people are trying to read. If you go to our website, HomelandSecurityUS.com, and just look at the logo on the top left-hand side, that's what the bumper sticker is.
Yeah, and again, it's pretty unassuming. It's kind of like the secret handshake club, if you will. If you're getting gas and see that on somebody's window, you can say, hey, maybe we know each other. Who knows? But it's just something. It serves a purpose, not just a novelty purpose, but it serves in my view, a purpose of kind of a method of identification. Some people, again, will argue, well, we don't, certainly we want to stay below the radar. Are you kidding me? You're smack dab in the middle of the radar. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You could trust me on this. Everyone who listens to this program, well, everyone who's sucking air, who's has a cell phone, has a computer, has a phone, has an address, has a pulse. You're on the radar. So just be advised of that.
We actually have news on that tonight about the U.S. terrorist database, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I got to ask you, the picture that is used for your article, Flight 17, and the panorama of peril, that word messed with me. Is that from a picture of our trip back from Montana in the morning from the Montana to Denver flight?
That's classified.
Okay. Just wondering because it does look similar to, and I don't know why I remember that. It looks like it's the morning. It looks like it's from the flight we took. But that'll be my guess, and if I'm not going to get an answer, we'll leave it at that. Let's get into the content.
Well, wait a second. Just to be clear, what that is the wing of a plane that is in flight, and it's meant to. It's just meant to serve as a place marker for that particular story. It has really no significance.
No, I know. It looked familiar.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I don't know where. Seriously, I don't know where that came from. I know that it was one of my stock. I know that I took it, but I just don't know where it came from.
Well, I'll tell you what. One of the things that makes me remember it is because of all the connecting flights we took. I don't know, 3 each way and 3 back. 3 each way. We always sat either on or right next to the wing every single time. And I know you remember that, but in the one flight you went, there was room enough. There was only one flight. It was early in the morning. It was on the way back, where you were able to get up out of the seat you were assigned and go to the back of the plane and take pictures. I
just wanted to get away from you.
Probably.
That's all. I was not in a good mood.
Well,
let me tell you something. And I had said. And I'll let me admit this. I had said I have actually gone back on my word, and I made a public statement and a big deal about a public statement about never flying because of the TSA. And in this particular case, I just physically I would not be able to handle a 3-day car ride, 9 hours a day.
When we went to Florida, we drove. And about 9 or 10 hours each day. It was 2 days because we had our family with us, and that was pretty rough for all of us for whatever reason. And we used to do that. I mean, you and me would do that. We did it in 1 day, or 24 hours the last time we went down there.
Exactly.
I don't know what's changed, but it was rough this time.
Well, and the other, and I'll use this as kind of a justification. The last time I took a flight was right around 9/11, maybe a year or two afterwards. That was to attend a conference, the investigative conference. Well, at that time they did not have the level of TSA presence in the airports. Now, it's one thing to talk about the TSA; it's another thing to experience it. So I figured, okay, let me experience this, or let me see what's actually taking place. And it's really by God's great graces that I'm not still sitting in some airport jail at the moment.
I threatened to leave him there. I said, I will leave. I will get on this plane.
Yeah, we had a little row with the TSA agents in I don't know, one of the cities, but I did anyway because.
And then afterwards, you were being as respectful as you could, but when we got away from the TSA, you were furious. And it's not that you didn't want to show your true emotion to them, but the longer we sat and waited to board that plane, the angrier you got.
Oh, and I was pretty vocal about it, and I had.
We had a Vietnam veteran sitting across from us in the lobby or the.
Yeah, in the passenger waiting area, and I said, here's a guy sitting across from us that fought for our country, and we're treated like a bunch of prison camp. That's like a gulag by the Nazis in the airport, and then of course that statement said loud enough, reverberated through this echo chamber of a airport, and did draw some attention and warrants. There was I think an air marshal that watched until I got on the aircraft. So anyway, all right.
Back to this flight. I see. I did not get a chance to read your article here. I went to. I had a dinner tonight with my wife and with my mom, but you didn't post this earlier. I know you were going through it. I heard some things on the way over here, and maybe your article doesn't address the certain issues here as I'm reading through it. But there was reports I heard today on Bloomberg News, I believe it was, of bodies falling from the sky through people's houses, and it was shot down by a missile for sure. It was they're saying Russian separatist, yet blaming it on Russia through the separatists, saying the technology. There's no way that these guys could have done what they did unless they had experience, and they wouldn't be able to have the weaponry unless they had access to the Russian arsenal.
Okay, in my view, here's the bottom line. Everything related to Flight 17, Malaysia Flight 17, stinks. The official story stinks. The fact that Fox, MSNBC, CBS, NBC, ABC, ABCDEFG, whatever news outlet had, the fact that they had the information within seconds, I mean almost instantly, tells me that there's something very wrong with this story. Everyone out there needs to be looking, thinking, considering, contemplating what the big agenda, what the real agenda here. The real agenda, folks, is to get us into World War III. They've attempted it via Syria. They're now attempting it via Ukraine. Folks, I would urge everyone to listen to, also go on HomelandSecurityUS.com, listen to the audio that the guerrilla economist had done the day before. And again, I would also urge everyone to please go to HomelandSecurityUS.com and read the article there, or comment, or read the article at Canada Free Press and leave your discussion comment or whatever there. But folks, look, we've got a criminal cabal that exists within the U.S. government. It continues to poke at Russia. We are at war. The Cold War never ceased in practicality. Now, it merely just took on different forms. The Islamic agenda is part of this that plays an integral role in this strategy overall, but they too are being played by the globalists. Regional conflicts, various civil wars have been and continue to be seeded by Western intelligence agencies to change the balance of power. And as I've written, it's much like the merging the Bay of Pigs with the real-life version of the movie Groundhog Day in the larger sense. Now, given the proxy and asymmetrical warfare where the Western alliance is creating chaos against Russia also by proxy by China, or against China as well, there will be false flag operations. And I do believe that this is not necessarily a false flag, but the blame will be placed in a way that will, in fact, create the public sentiment, or is designed to get public backing for our involvement in the shooting war. And you might think, well, why? Well, look, what was lacking with Syria? The willingness of the public to engage us militarily into another conflict. Yet, after 9/11, look what happened after 9/11. And I use the example of the sinking of the Lusitania. Folks, tell me, who would send a Malaysian flight over a war area when other airlines or other aircraft are told not to fly over that area?
Okay, this is one of the misconceptions you might be able to clear up. I've been hearing from multiple news agencies that this was a common, for instance, when this first broke yesterday, Sean Hannity said this was a commonly used route that was being used up until even yesterday.
Well,
and I've also heard the other side, that it was a region that was, not war-torn, but told to divert from. And I've also heard that the plane was diverted into this area. So,
well, actually it was. In fact, it was a 6-hour. That particular flight was delayed by 6 hours, and it was also diverted either 10 degrees or I think it was 10 degrees off course to cause it to fly over that specific area. Now, what Sean Hannity is saying, that other flights routinely flew that over there, that's baloney, because you could look on the flight tracker.
Yeah, flight tracker. That's
okay, and you know what? You'll see this planes everywhere, overlapping images of planes. If you're familiar with flight tracker, they give you little
plane graphics.
Yeah, exactly. Over a satellite or a relief type map of the countries and show the borders and such. And what's absent, of course, is any air traffic over that particular area. So no. And I also want to dispel the myth, for example, that because that plane was flying at 33,000 feet, and that in fact that things were okay. And at 60 knots, I have to look at my notes with the math. I think you're traveling at
538 or 548 miles an hour, something like that.
Yeah, but I don't know how many miles per minute, but it's significant. So the window to shoot a book missile at an aircraft like this is about anywhere between 1.5 to 2 minutes.
And then we get into the technological aspects where there were other planes shot down in that area throughout the week. They were military planes and cargo planes, but
they had lower altitudes, admittedly.
Right, and there was actually a warning put out that, flights from the 8,000 to 9,000 altitude, fly a different route. And that was put out a few weeks back, but they could have put altitudes of, higher altitudes out, warnings. So either they didn't think they had the technological capabilities or they weren't in danger.
Well, just so people know, none of this would benefit Vladimir Putin, okay? Just so you know that, folks. And as number one and number two, nothing about this should be taken at face value, folks. Use your discernment.
And interestingly enough, before we bring in our guest who's with us now, we had seen a report put out earlier saying Putin calling for immediate ceasefire. Well, then, only thing I hear on the news is Obama calling for a ceasefire. And you know how that goes, the overlapping and the political games that they play from the West. And some of the articles are interesting, and we can get into those later. But right now...
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so proud to announce, and I want to thank Ken very much for arranging this. I'm very proud. Both Joe and I are very proud to have with us Ms. Catherine Austin Fitz. And if you go to HomelandSecurityUS.com, click on the link on the right-hand side. There, it's a link directly to Catherine's website, the Solari Report. I've got to tell you, for the folks, this is so odd, because before I talked with Ken, and he said, "What do you think about having Catherine Austin Fitz on?" And I said, "Are you serious? I'd love it, because really for 4 Saturdays in a row, I would watch. There were 2 different videos I would watch, and each video, one was a video. Well, one was King World, and then another video would have Catherine Austin Fitz on, different hosts. In fact, I think the last one I watched was with Greg Hunter. And so I was so excited when Ken had mentioned this. So I want to thank him very much. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know who Catherine Austin Fitz is, she's got a resume that would probably fill the 3 or 4 different people's lifetimes. Her accomplishments are many. She is the president of Solari and Company Incorporated. I'm sorry. She's the publisher of the Solari Report. I would highly recommend anybody interested in their financial health, anyone interested in what is in the offing economically, to add the Solari Report to your paid subscription reports. It is an invaluable resource. It's the Solari Report. Once again, Catherine Austin Fitz, Solari.com, accessible via HomelandSecurityUS.com, and a person I admire. She, of course, was with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development in Washington, D.C., was Assistant Secretary for Housing and Federal Housing for the Federal Housing Commissioner under the George Herbert Walker Bush administration, and of course got to see both the inside and outside of the finances, the covert, the overt, the black, the open. So it's an honor to bring on Ms. Catherine Austin Fitz. Ma'am, welcome to the Hagmann Hagmann Report. Do we have sound?
We have sound. It says she's connected.
Okay.
I'll send her a message here.
All right.
And ask her if she's hearing us.
Yes. Well, sometimes this happens, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, live radio and things do happen. But folks, I cannot stress enough. Solari, SOLARI.com. It's a fantastic website full of information that you need to know. We have V, the guerrilla economist, on, and of course we talk about all sorts of economic issues. Well, I can think of no better person to explain what's taking place right now on a macro level than our current guest, Catherine Austin Fitz. And I really believe that she has got her finger on the pulse of really what's going on. And our conversation tonight is, while you're getting her back, our conversation tonight is going to run the gambit. With the interview with Greg Hunter, if you haven't seen that on YouTube, she does talk about the macro and microeconomic picture. She talks about asymmetrical warfare, war against the middle class. I'm going to try and add her to the call on Skype here. So okay, that sounds good. And she talks about something called a slow burn. She also is familiar with Carl Denninger, who's somebody that we respect. She will be talking about everything from the asymmetrical warfare that's involved in the economic aspect of things, economic venue. We're going to be talking about something called the tipping point, the slow burn that she predicted in 2013. Her predictions, economic predictions, have been pretty much right on the money, and I'm very excited to have her. So, Joe, give me a thumbs up when we have Ms. Fitz on the line. Ma'am, are you there? Could be something. We're connected. It could be something on her end. Perhaps check the mute. Let me see here. I'm looking good. Everything, all my lights are green. Meters are popping. Okay. Yeah, Catherine, if you can hear us, it says that you're on the Skype call, and we cannot hear you. And I think, you know what? Maybe she's calling by phone. I'm gonna. Okay. Well, we can work with this. And folks, doesn't this just add charm to our broadcast? Doesn't this add charm to the broadcast? No. You can't go through a week without some technical problem. Sure. On the Solari report. Yeah, I think we have her here by phone. Okay.
Can you hear me on the phone?
We can. Yes, we can. Thank you so much. It's never a dull moment.
I don't know why they had said I could hear you perfectly, but for some reason you couldn't hear me. I don't know what that was.
Well, thank you for joining us.
I'm so sorry.
We're sorry as well, but thank you so much for agreeing to join us tonight. We're so excited. I was saying that I listened to you for like four Saturdays in a row. I'd wake up, have my coffee, and hear you in different venues, and I just loved the information. I love your technique of explaining things, and our audience, I'm sure, will love it too.
Okay, well, I'm,
Wow.
I'm still trying to figure out what in the world's going on.
Well, you mean technical-wise going on, or
no,
going
I'm
on
still
in the
trying to
larger
understand. You know, my dream has been to understand the governance system on planet Earth, and I have to tell you, I find it stupefying.
Well, you're in good company, because I'm, and I know a lot. I hear from a lot of our listeners, and we've got listeners living abroad, and of course here in the United States and all across the Americas, and one of their biggest questions is, what's going on with the economy, and how can we prepare, and how can we best get out of the way of what's coming? So there's just so much to talk about. So what I thought we'd do, since we really didn't have time to talk before the interview, what I figured we'd do, if this is okay with you, if you don't mind, because you're appearing to maybe a slightly different audience, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in the economic world, and then we'll go from there.
Well, it all started, actually, I grew up in West Philadelphia. You guys in New York?
No, we're actually in Erie, Pennsylvania. That's where we broadcast.
Oh, really?
We're on the other side of the state.
That was the coldest winter in the United States, Erie, Pennsylvania. Okay, so I grew up in West Philly, and on the other side of the state. But and I'll tell you how it started. It started because there were 4 fraudulent home builder deals catty-corner to my parents' house. My dad, when he came back from World War II, bought a little VA row house. And I used to walk by them. There was a sign out front. They were boarded up and empty for 4 years. There was a sign outside saying, by order of the Assistant Secretary of Housing / Federal Housing Commissioner. I used to think, who is that idiot, and why would they let these homes be empty for 4 years while we had a family across from us living in a 1-bedroom apartment. And that, of course, was the same time. That was the early 60s when the drugs were coming in, too. And everybody used to always say that they had to do this, they had to do the fraud, they had to do the drugs to make money. And I thought, well, what is this money thing? And why is it you can make more money destroying a neighborhood than fixing it? Because it always seemed to me you ought to be able to make more money building it up. So my theory was, as a child, I was going to learn how all the money in the worked and then turn things around. And it took me, a whole lifetime to understand that. To understand how the money works in one tiny neighborhood in West Philadelphia, you have to understand all the money on the planet because of the way the money is. It's very centrally controlled. Anyway, so I ended up going to Wall Street and working at a firm that would allow me to sort of move from department to department. I was trying to map out all the money. And finally I realized, it's rigged from Washington, so I've got to go to Washington. So I became Assistant Secretary of Housing, and as they were swearing me in, the Secretary said, by order of the President, you're now the Assistant Secretary of Housing, Federal Housing Commissioner. And, gentlemen, I absolutely froze because I said, oh, no, I'm the idiot. And I went downstairs, and I called in one of my deputies. I said, how many boarded-up single-family homes do we have? And he said, 50,000. And I said, oh, God, there are hundreds of thousands of children around this country who hate me. Anyway, so I worked in the Bush administration for 18 months and then had to leave because I wanted to run things too clean. And I left thinking, the fascists are going to get this technology and kill us all. I discovered the Internet. So I started an investment bank in Washington, Hamilton Securities Group, and the idea was to take new technology and use it to increase the learning speed, learning metabolism from a economic and business and sort of cultural standpoint in a place that you could literally finance places with equity and so radically diminish the amount of money the government was spending. And part of it, I was part of a group of pension fund investors and other investors who were looking for a way to re-engineer the American economy as part of globalization and do so in a way that created tremendous wealth for the pension funds. So I worked on that and, of course, ran into the buzzsaw of the government and the large banks wanting to engineer a housing bubble, which is very destructive of neighborhoods. So I sort of had the model of let's build up the neighborhoods and make the value of the real estate go up, and they were ready to do another pump and dump of places. And I think I would describe that as part of a much bigger rebalancing of the global economy that moved tremendous amounts of money out of the developed world and into the both emerging markets and I also think black budget. And to a certain extent, we're looking at the privatization, the changing of the governance system from a world where assets are owned and run by sovereign governments to much higher percentage are owned by private investors and run by corporations. So think of this as privatization on the just do it model. I call the whole process financial coup d'etat. Anyway, so I litigated with the federal government for 11 years, and when my sort of outward bound law degree program was over, I started an investment advisory company because everybody kept asking me, what should I do? And I would tell them, I don't know, I can tell you about the corruption, you figure it out. Finally, I realized, okay, maybe this is what I am called to do. And it gave me the ability to work. And, I'd always worked with large corporations and governments, and instead it gave me the ability to work with families and individuals. And if you look at how you build an economy, you really build it one person and one family at a time. And it goes up from there. So that's been a very satisfying experience. And then I was answering the same question many, many times a week, and so I finally decided to start the Solari Report, which is an interview and broadcast podcast we do once a week with lots of other materials and special reports, and it's really a very holistic look at, if you are a parent or a mother or a father or really somebody who's responsible for navigating your family and your family assets through this time. What do you do? How do you do it? How do you get a good map of what's going on? And how do you make sure your family is well according to all the things that means? So the Solari Report, we're at Solari.com, and then I have an online book describing all of my, nefarious learnings in the Bush administration and then in the Clinton administration. And it's called Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits at Dunwalkie.com. And so that's me. So I sit every day and try to make sense of it. And I have to tell you, gentlemen, I've spent my whole life trying to understand how things work and how we could get them to work much better, because the potential financially of a much wealthier planet is enormous. So that is the reason I'm very much an optimist. But I shake my head and look at what's going on and saying, well, it just keeps getting weirder.
It does indeed. And and this may sound a little bit twisted, but I suppose the more I attempt to understand the economy of today, the more I realize the less I know. And it's obviously the economy is a different model than it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 10 months ago in some respects. And
right.
It's one thing that I really enjoyed hearing you say, and I think this is with Greg Hunter during his interview, is to survive today, of course, and we'll get more into this as the program unfolds, but to survive and to keep it viable, you have to keep learning, and you also have to stay healthy, and subsets of those two things. So it's really interesting. If I can ask, with your background, I had heard something here, and I think you had discussed this, and I'm not sure who with. It was with one of your during one of your interviews. You were subjected to at one point a real bad time where you spent a number of years. You had designed apparently a digital software that actually kind of threatened the existence of central banks. And I don't know if this is something you want to get into, but from this, it was my understanding that you really had a learning experience from this. That you were subjected to some pretty heavy duty, I don't know, harassment.
Well, if you've ever seen the movie Enemy of the State, I tell people I played Will Smith in real life.
Okay.
But in fact, in the resource center at the Dunwalkie website, we put up enormous documentation to support everything in the article. There are literally hundreds of, or tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pages of documents. But we went through a process, and it's all listed up on the website, where we had 12 tracks of litigation, 18 audits and investigations, a smear campaign and physical harassment all happening at the same time. It's very immersive, and it it was basically one of those food fights. Matt Taibbi has a new book where he describes an insurance company going through a very similar process, and we called it the SWAT. As we were pretty much targeted from all sides. And so I say I played Will Smith in real life, but it was very immersive. And it certainly was a process where you realized that when you're in a situation like that, there is no law. You're on your own. It's not like, you can't call the police. You can't call the it's funny, we tried to hire, I know you guys do private investigation work or did, but we tried to hire 3 different security firms. They came in and did their due diligence and said, it's too dangerous, we can't help you.
Oh, that's nice.
And one guy on the way out, he said to me, lady, listen, do me a favor, buy birds. I said, why? He said, if the birds die, get out of the house.
Oh, my word. Okay. Well,
okay.
That gives you the warm and fuzzies, doesn't it? I mean, oh my goodness. Okay. One thing, ladies and gentlemen, you might not know about our guest, Catherine Austin Fitz. Her website, solari.com, is she was one of the first. I think back in the late 1990s, 1998, perhaps 10 years before the mortgage crisis, or the serious and systemic fraud that made its way to the surface in 2008. You were warning. You were one of the first people to warn about this the systemic fraud.
I started warning people in '99, and I never dreamed it could go on as long as it did. I never finished explaining about the software, so let me just step back and do that.
Oh, sure.
Because it fits into sort of warning people. I think there were several things we did that sort of stepped in the political minefield, but one of them was we were developing a software package called Community Wizard that would let you, think of it this way, you vote for political representation. What's your congressional district?
Talk about brain freeze.
Pardon me?
I'll have to look it up. For the state, we're number 3.
No. Okay, brain freeze. I plead ignorance at the moment. Okay, seriously.
Well, you vote every 2 years for your congressional
correct.
representative. Correct?
Yeah, we're in the.
Okay,
now,
how in the world are you going to hold that person responsible without looking at the sources and uses of federal spending, contracts, and other sort of economically important regulation within your congressional district?
I don't think you can.
Well,
I mean,
if you buy a stock, you get an annual financial statement, right?
Correct.
Why don't you get an annual financial statement for your congressional district?
Good point.
Right.
Why don't
we? What I will tell you is the finance chairman of the people running for Congress in your area have the equivalent of that.
Okay.
So here's the reality. So what I said, I learned a lot about the power of place-based data when I was Assistant Secretary of Housing, and one thing we might do is tell some of those stories because they're fascinating. But I got out and I said, okay, well, if the government refuses to provide place-based financial materials contiguous to the areas that you drive around and see, because most of this fraud could not happen if you had place-based financial disclosure. So, for example, when I was Assistant Secretary, we would get lists of foreclosures that said we'd have 10 foreclosed houses on that block, and you'd fly there and you'd walk up and there'd be an empty lot. And you'd think, how can this be? So there's, a lot of this fraud depends on people being disassociated between the government financials and the world they walk around and view. Anyway, so we decided to just make relational database technology. It just sort of really blossomed. We discovered it, saw the opportunity, and said, let's, collect up all the different databases that are publicly available from the government and use GIS software to make them accessible to citizens. and we were building a website that would allow that to happen. And one of the things you could see where the foreclosed mortgage or the defaulted mortgages and foreclosed properties in the federal government were clustered. And obviously there were some, information coming out of that. But needless to say, one of the things that started to happen was the amount of mortgages being issued started to be, I would submit, questionable given how many houses were in that neighborhood. So we started to see a lot more mortgage securities and mortgages than there were necessarily, related houses. And I think a lot of the housing bubble and a lot of the fraud couldn't have happened if citizens could associate sort of the exploding mortgage originations or mortgage insurance originations at the federal government and in the GSEs if they could relate it on a place-based basis. So I think if Community Wizard had continued, it would have made it extremely difficult for the housing bubble to get as big and as bad as it had. Anyway, to suffice it to say, the Department of Justice and the HUD Inspector General seized our office, seized the software. It took me 6 years to get it out of court control, and by the time I did, the most valuable pieces had disappeared forever. So that was Community Wizard.
My word. Obviously, you don't have to read between the lines there, folks. Obviously, we can see what's taking place or what took place there.
Well, and just remember, though, here's the thing that's important to remember. This is not just a story of big bad central banks or New York Fed member banks or the Treasury or these various institutions not wanting this stuff to get out. The sensitivity, if you look at the current model, if you and I were to take, the financials for your county or my county, what we would discover is that there's what I call a negative return on investment economy. Every year, the government pours money into the place, and it doesn't make the place more productive. It's not a good investment. In fact, people are being paid to become stupider and stupider, and so you have this sort of spiral down, and it's all part of the dumbing down. But if you look at that, everybody's very parochial and sensitive about protecting their money. Everybody's holding on to their money for dear life. So I'll give you a story. When I was in the running Hamilton Securities, we were helping HUD auction off mortgages, and we would find neighborhoods where the government was spending $250,000 to construct new public housing when $50,000 to $100,000 would buy and rehab a FHA foreclosed property, within the HUD umbrella. And I would take, maps of neighborhoods where we could get 3 to 5 homes for the price of one by moving money out of the public housing and construction into the foreclosed, re-engineering the foreclosed properties. And so I took one of the special assistants, the guy who ran the public housing program, out and showed her the maps, and I said, look at this, Mindy, and I was particularly focused at that time on New Orleans. We could create 3 to 5 homes for the price of one. And she turned bright red and looked at me and said, but how would we generate fees for our friends? So all the way down the line, you have 50 years, or, since World War II, you have decades and decades of fees for our friends. And so we have an entire economy organized around these different pots of pork and other things, and it's never really been subject to a test of how do we optimize financial performance locally? How do we get the highest return on our investment? And what you'll find is everybody in the food chain is very, very sensitive and very dependent on those cash flows and very afraid to talk about it.
Very interesting.
So the politics of bringing transparency to government money, is sensitive all the way up and down the line.
This year, the highest taxable or most income generated by tax revenue was this year. And these other agencies, personally garnished. So revenue generating for the other agencies and the government as a whole itself. It seems to be their first priority rather than helping people.
Well, that's the question. Who's really running things? Because in my experience, the budget of the United States is not run by the Congress and it's not run by the White House. So think of the government as a bus, and the driver who's driving it, his steering wheel isn't connected to the wheels. Downstairs there's another driver, and they're really driving the bus. And the titular driver is sort of is an actor, is somebody who's there for show. But I'll never forget, I was at a town hall meeting with a congressman who was on both the Budget and Appropriations Committee, and I think this was in early 2002, and he was running for the governor of Tennessee, and I was at a town hall meeting listening to his speech, so here he is, he's on a member of the Budget and Appropriation Committees, and I said, there's $3.3 trillion missing from the government accounts over the last 3 years, and he said, yes, I know. And I said, what are you doing about it? And he looked shocked, and he said, nothing. There's nothing I can do. Well, let me give you another story. In the summer of 2000, I was visiting with the chief of staff to the senator who was then the chair of the HUD and 21 other. I think it's a large number of agencies that does HUD and Treasury and NASA and a whole bunch of others. Anyway. And I was on a bill collection trip. I was just trying to get my company paid. And the chief of staff said to me, what do you think is going on at HUD? And I said, I don't know. What do you think is going on at HUD? And they looked me dead in the eye and said, HUD is being run as a criminal enterprise. Now, what you need to understand is that HUD is run on a matrix structure that is essentially controlled by the New York Fed member banks, the Treasury Department, the Department of Justice, and a few other places. And so it can't be, not to mention the big defense contractors who run the system. So it can't be run as a criminal enterprise unless they want to. Now, what's interesting is if you look at that, go back to 2000, the chairman of the Appropriation Committee with Cuomo running HUD, chairman being a Republican, voted for a big increase in HUD's budget. Now, that's a month after telling, his chief of staff telling me that HUD's being run as a criminal enterprise. So remember, we're now up to over $8.5 trillion missing from the federal government. The federal government has refused since the middle of the 90s to publish audited financial statements as required by law. And, and we have reports of over $8.5 trillion in undocumentable adjustments. So that is an organization which is operating very significantly outside both the Constitution and the laws related to financial management, and it's doing with it impunity while it continues to be the largest issuer of securities in the global markets. So that is a system that is way, way outside of the law. And here's the reality. For a government to have sovereignty, it has to have information sovereignty, and it has to have financial sovereignty. And the reality is the federal government's finances are run by the New York Fed member banks, and its systems are run by a series of private defense contractors. So, when I worked at HUD, I couldn't get the financial information on some of the programs or when I came back as the contractor because the defense contractor who controlled the systems wouldn't give me the data.
Obviously, that's a huge problem and insurmountable in your position, correct? I mean, there was nothing you could do.
Here's the thing: it's not a problem. What it means is that if you're the assistant secretary and you are responsible by law you're authorized and required by law to make sure that certain conditions exist within the operation, and the people who are running the information systems will not take orders from you and will not provide information, and there's nothing you can do, then in fact you've had a coup d'etat. That's called a financial coup d'etat.
Indeed. Now, from an investigative point of view, which is how I think, how Joe thinks, how we think collectively and individually, at what point, if we're looking at the entirety of the financial system, we'll just say the United States to begin with, at what point did we experience a coup?
Okay, so we can take this back. We can go back centuries, we can go back 100 years, but let's just go back to World War II. What happened in World War II, because there's a tremendous logic behind, I think, what has evolved. We came out of World War II with several large pockets of what someone might call loot. So we had seizures of assets from the Japanese. We had seizures of assets from the Nazis. And that money was put in a variety of pools, and the intelligence agencies were put in charge of it. So we converted the intelligence agencies into not just intelligence agencies, but bankers, okay? Not to say that there weren't, the banking community and intelligence community in some sense weren't already, two sides of one coin if you look at the history of how finance works. And then we did another thing, which was we created, with the 47 and 49 Act, the National Security Act and the CIA Act, we created a vehicle that would allow the federal credit to basically finance an infinite amount of money and allow that money to be appropriated to agencies and then clawed back for the black budget. And the black budget could, in one sense, interact with what I call with the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which is the mother of all slush funds at the Treasury Department. So we have this hidden system of finance. We have one or more slush funds controlled by Treasury and the New York Fed. Now we've created this line of the black budget, and then we created in the first Bush administration, or in the Reagan administration when Bush came in and in essence got a deal to run the National Security Council, we created executive orders that said, okay, all that money can go to private contractors to do contracts. So you gave private corporations the ability to access an infinite amount of money financed on a non-transparent basis by a government who had no restriction on how much they could borrow. And with that money, they could build and develop the most powerful technology in the world on a non-transparent basis. Okay? And between them and the intelligence agencies, you've created the capacity to kill with impunity and to do it invisibly with the most powerful technology. Okay, well, let's keep going forward. Then, in addition, you create an overt economy. You centralize the overt economy, and a lot of the 80s and 90s did that. And with creating securitization in stock markets and bond markets all over the world, you create the capacity to lever the whole economy on an extraordinary basis. And then you go through a process where the people running all three systems confuse them and get them to dance together. And what you've got is the most powerful financial mechanism ever created. And you've got the ability to basically, for example, issue, as I believe they did in the 90s, extraordinary amounts of fraudulent mortgage government paper and use that money to literally take control of the planet, have a bailout crisis that then has to pay off your phony baloney paper. So think of it as a leverage buyout of a planet. When you do a leverage buyout, you buy a company with a company's own cash. And this, from what I can tell, is literally the leverage buyout of a planet.
Wow. Pretty significant. So what, if I'm understanding this correctly, what you're describing is really a textbook example of, well, fascism, I suppose, when you merge the private and government interests, and then you're also talking about centralization and complete control and subjugation of everything.
Well, but here's why I would be careful on how we label it. I operated in Washington and Wall Street at very low levels. So, I don't want to pretend that I had access to any kind of special or extraordinary information other than, what you get from sort of being around. But one of the things I can tell you is, to the extent I experience moving around at the top of Wall Street in Washington, I didn't mean a lot of bad, evil people. In other words, the people I worked with in many respects were some of the most enlightened and people I like the most. And I think that's why I think it's very important before we understand what in the world, or as we try and understand what in the world is going on, we need to understand what are the conditions that people are dealing with. So why have so many legitimate, decent people gone to such lengths to raise literally trillions of dollars for the black budget? Why have they done that? Why do we have so much advanced technology which is secret that is suppressed? What is all that about? Why do we have all these strange vehicles flying around? I don't know if you guys have seen the documentary, The Phoenix Lights. It's about this enormous UFO that's sailed down the side of Arizona. And finally, everyone, including the governor, after he left office, fessed up and admitted, yes, we all saw it. Thousands of people saw it. And I'll never forget, I was looking at the time for $3.3 trillion that had gone missing from the Department of Defense. And when I first saw the picture in the documentary, because this was very filmed, of this enormous thing, sort of sailing down the side of Arizona in the middle of the night, I looked at it and I said, I bet that's where the $3.3 trillion went. I bet Lockheed Martin would build that for $3.3 trillion.
If you look close enough, you'll see the price tag dangling off the right side of that craft, right?
Right. We do cartoons at the Celery Report, and my favorite cartoon, we have a great cartoonist, he did one of a UFO that says Lockheed Martian on it.
Oh my goodness.
And it's right over the Congress, it's right over the Capitol, and on one side the congressman says, gentlemen, speaking to the DOD, we want to see your financial books. We want to, see what's going on in your financial books. And the guy from DOD says, oh, our accountants have been abducted. They were abducted by a UFO. We can't report. Anyway, so so here's the question: what in the world is going on? And I don't know, but I am loath to jump to the conclusion, the world is being run by a bunch of fascists and they're just mean and evil and taking everything. In other words, there's a logic for what's happening, and I don't think we understand what it is. Now, it could just be that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, because there's no doubt about it that when you create this kind of financial power and you give it to a relatively small group of people on a non-transparent basis, you're going to create a machinery that can, combine it with advanced technology. It can run out of control.
That's very true. Very true and very well said. Very well balanced approach to what appears to be taking place. Folks, you're listening to a very special Friday edition of the Hagmann Hagmann Report. It is a live broadcast. Today is the 18th day of July 2014.
Ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 2 of this Friday edition of the Hagmann Hagmann Report. Today is July 18th, 2014. We are live. Our guest is Catherine Austin Fitz. She temporarily disconnected during the break. We were going to get her back as a real fast first hour, and here she is, right back with us. I'm not sure what happened, if it was our system or her, but the second time we've had.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, we can. Great to hear your voice. Actually, it sounds stronger. For some reason, the connection sounds better. I'd like to start off this hour, if we could. Break this down a little bit. First, basically, how we got to where we're at. I think you covered some of that, but where we're at right now in the progression of events, where you see things headed. And then one of the things that are really on the minds of many of our listeners, we've got a listener, Joe. I want to say thank you for listening from the UK. Karen, of course, and Robert from Rome, Italy, listening live. We've got a number of people listening from the Philippines, which I want to say hello to you. Numerous people traveling right now in police cruisers, in the front seat, not the back, I should add. Hello to you folks as well. And thanks for tuning in with us. This fits, well, one of the things, too, and we can, as the program unfolds, is to get your take on how people can protect themselves, their wealth, their blood, their life's toil from the debasement that we see taking place, or the evaluation of things. So we can get into that later. But before we do,
okay,
I've heard you talk about, and this is something that I'm not clear about. Economy 2.0, 1.0. Perhaps I'm mistaken on that. Different economies that you've referenced, or different incarnations of our economy. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, the 2.0 economy is the way I describe the industrial economy, and it's the economy that you and I grew up in, and it was an economy where the G7 nations, the developed nations, were much wealthier than the G20 and the rest of the world. And we're going to, and a lot of it's driven by technology, we're going to a world which is, instead of an industrial economy, it's much more of a networked economy. And we're rebalancing to a global economy. So the differential, George Kennan said at the end of World War II that the American people we had 6% of the people and 50% of the wealth. Well, we're going to a world where we have a much closer, our wealth is much closer to the percentage of people that we have. So there's a tremendous rebalancing going on, and there's an integration of technology, and that technology is permitting both a centralization of political and economic control, and it's also really causing what I consider to be a enormous split between the leadership and everyone else, and we're literally seeing what I call a breakaway civilization, where you have a portion of the leadership and the wealthy literally moving enormous amounts of money out of government and out of sort of communities and using it to really build what is, from a cultural and legal and financial standpoint, literally a separate civilization here on Earth. So we're moving towards something that's much more global, it's much more integrated, it's much more networked. Technology is integrating much more, but we are moving away from democracy into something that has much more central control. And I think part of it is that the leadership really does not feel comfortable, given the speed at which things are moving, to build and manage consensus of the general population. What they'll tell you is they just don't think democracy works, and hence the sort of central control. Much of it is done very invisibly. I think one of the great things about the Snowden revelations is it's helped people understand how invasive the technology is and how relevant it is, because we're literally looking at a leadership that knows everything there is to know about us, down to very extraordinary minute levels, and we know nothing about them, even though we're paying our taxes and financing a lot of what's going on. So I think we're watching a re-engineering of the global governance system, but we're also watching a reorganization of the economy for new technology. So I'll give you a perfect example. At the beginning of 2011, we had maybe 300 million to 500 million people on smartphones. Now, only a few years later, we're approaching 3 billion. So literally, we're seeing people all over the world get smartphones before they get toilets.
That's a startling statement.
Right.
Wow.
So we're now talking about, instead of the United States being the largest consumer market and the European Union being the largest consumer market, we're talking about people and smartphones everywhere being the largest consumer market. So it's not surprising we see Microsoft make an Indian the head of the company. At December, I think the sales at the Apple Store, just at the App Store alone, were something like $10 billion, but more of their sales are coming from Asia than from the United States. So we're talking, just as globalization fundamentally reorganized how we did production, now we're fundamentally organizing how distribution occurs as well. And if you look at the last 20 years, one of the ways we kept a false prosperity going within the United States is by basically having China and Asian emerging markets produce goods and build the production side of their economy by basically providing the American consumer with enormous amounts of, sort of non-essential items. It's interesting if you look at the latest statistics. In 2011, the U.S. had 69% of our economy was personal consumption. We had 4.5% of the global population and 17% of the global consumer demand. China and India had 40% of the global population and only 4.2% of the global consumer demand. That has to be rebalanced, which means our share of consumer demand is going to drop and their share is going to rise. And that's going to be quite an extraordinary rebalancing. I think that's part of the squeeze that the middle class feel. And one of the reasons they feel it, what I was working on with Community Wizard and these other tools, we knew that we were going to ship all the jobs abroad. That was all known in Washington at the time. So the plan, the World Trade Organization went into effect, the Uruguay round of GATT, and the plan was to rebalance the global economy. And so part of my work was, how do we help the American people and the American workforce jump the curve and succeed in that environment? And so a lot of what I was doing was talking about how people and households and communities can pay down debt and build skills and be effective in that environment. And rather than do that, our model was rejected, and that's what the Dylan Reed book is about, and I would really encourage you to read it. That was rejected, and they said, no, let's load people up with debt that they could never afford, and let's have them use that debt to buy all these consumer products from the emerging markets and China, et cetera. And so we did the opposite of what was needed. And so now that we have basically spent the last 20 years liquidating our wealth by buying consumer products and loading up on debt, we find ourselves in a position that is very financially weak individually and collectively, and makes us extremely weak politically, because we've shot our wad on things we didn't need, houses that were bigger than we could afford and lots of stuff. And now now we're in the end game, and it's going to squeeze.
Yeah, and what you're talking about, the prioritizing of people buying things, it reminds me of seeing people in the poorest areas of town, but driving BMWs or driving Mercedes, and much of America in some way or another seems to live above its means and has a problem with prioritizing. I mean, even myself, and still learning, how to be the most efficient with money. But then you have the outright, the people who are like the black budgets, as you said. And these people they don't care about money or how they spend the money, but they've conditioned people to go with what's trendy. The materialistic society we live in is getting more materialistic. It's people would rather be wearing the newest pair of Air Jordans rather than they're concerned for having food on their table. It's very scary to see the direction our social and moral fabric is headed in.
Yeah, I think we have to rethink things. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think that we have to change our way of thinking to,
right,
to match the times. Go ahead.
Well, part of it is understanding that you're in a hostile environment. If you look at many of the people who consumed more than they could afford to do, they really didn't know. when they bought the big house, they thought they were going to be able to keep that job for 20 years. They didn't know the job was going to go to China, and they were going to be out in the street in 5 years and not be able to support their family. They didn't know that the environmental pollution was going to make their wife get cancer, just as they were getting thrown out of the house, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So part of this was what I call fraudulent inducement. You had an entire population who was encouraged to do things and behave in ways rather than being warned of what was coming. So, and I think a lot of Americans found themselves in a time trap where they made commitments, whether financial or personal, that committed them to produce time or money that, they woke up 10 years later and they didn't have enough. So part of it is we're digging out of that. But now that we know that we can't trust the system, if you will, then the question is, okay, how do we get a good map of what's going on, and then how do we navigate? And I think that's what you do with your show, and that's what I'm trying to do with this Leary Report, is to figure out how we can navigate this successfully, because it's fair to say that we're in hostile territory. We're in a war zone, if you will. And, it's spiritual warfare, and it's financial warfare, and it's legal warfare, and occasionally it turns into fist fights. So, or, I'm a dedicated gun owner. I'm a card-carrying member of the NRA, and the Tennessee Firearms Association. So, we are watching a systematic deterioration of the civilization that we're living in, and we're trying to figure out, okay, how do I navigate it, but how do I make a contribution to help send it back in the right direction?
I understand that. Okay, perfect. And it's great to know that you, in fact, are a card-carrying member, a fellow gun owner. That's great. Fantastic.
Well, it's really fun. I laugh every time. Because and in the bedroom I keep my Ruger on top of my Bible.
I love it. I love it. I knew a judge that had two things in his briefcase. Well, three if you count his lunch: his Bible and his handgun. It was a quarter common pleas judge. There was something right after I found out you were going to come on our program. I made a note. I've been wanting to ask you this question, and I apologize if this seems like a shotgun approach to how we're doing things here, but there's just so much to cover and so much information. This is one of the questions I've been really wanting to ask you, and I'll ask it now. And however it fits into the larger conversation, well, so be it. Back in 2013, I wrote an article, and this came from someone from inside the world of intelligence, of black ops, covert ops, whatever. And he pointed something out to me, and I looked through it and found this is true because, well, back some time ago, he said to me, look, the fate of America's economy has already been determined. It's been verified and already announced by the Obama White House, but it's received scant attention from the corporate media. Back in 2011, economist Kyle Bass he interviewed a senior member of Obama's administration about its planned solutions. Now, this is for fixing the U.S. economy and the trade deficit. And among the questions he asked was about the U.S. exports and wages, but the question itself was, at least in my view, not as nearly important as the response he received from this senior administration official who I believe, although I don't have any verification of this, was Timothy Geithner at the time. The single response was, we're just going to kill the dollar. Okay? I've been meaning to, I really want to ask you about that. Have you heard that before? And if so, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, what's obvious is we're in a long-term managed drop of the dollar. So what it looks like to me is the dollar system is being, use to soak every penny they can out of it. And then the question is, what's the end game? And I'm assuming where they're going is they want to convert to a global digital currency. Now, whether it's called a dollar, I always say as long as it's digital, they don't care if it's called a dollar or wampum beads. But I think, that's where it's going. And they're just running the dollar system out for as long as they can. And I, for one, think it's got probably a lot more power than a lot of other people do. Because it's ultimately a military and political question. How long do you... If you look at the technology and power that the breakaway civilization, what I call the breakaway, has, combined with the U.S. military and intelligence, they have the power to run the system forever. Now, the question is how many people are you going to kill to force it on the world?
Oh. Huh. That's a significant question.
Here's what it comes down to. All financial systems clear through cables or satellites. Whether it's the clearance system, whether it's the pricing mechanisms, whether it's the settlement systems, everything operates ultimately through the cables, through the satellites. And so who controls the suborbital platforms and who controls the cables and who controls the sea lanes? And then, of course, you got to ship things back and forth. So then that gets back again to who controls the sea lane. The reality is right now with the satellite systems, China only has a regional satellite system. They don't have a global satellite system. They don't have a Navy. They have one aircraft carrier. It's brand new. They don't have a Navy that controls the sea lanes globally. That's the United States. Now, I'm not saying that system isn't fraying at the edges, but, the reality is if you look at the train tracks of financial transactions and the train tracks of trade, those to this day are controlled essentially by the U.S. military and intelligence communities and their various corporate infrastructure.
So while they may be fragile, the system might be fragile, really what you're saying, I think what I hear you saying is there's no one else out there to replace us, basically.
Well, there is, but it's a gradual change. So if you look at the decision they made in the 90s, they decided to pull enormous capital out of the G7. Now, I think they put a lot in space and underground facilities in the black budget, et cetera, but let's put that aside. They shifted enormous investment out of the, they bubbled the dollar up. They smashed the other economies down. They smashed down Russia. They smashed down East Asia. They transferred the money. So dollar high, those other currencies smashed down. They picked things up for 10 cents on the dollar, and they bought up and created control of enormous amounts of the economy and introduced stock markets and securitization. And that was a move to transfer investment from countries where you have a slowing growth rate into places where you can have a much higher growth rate and you can have far more flexibility to do with labor as you want to. And so that was part of the rebalancing, and it's going to continue until we have a much more, we've just begun this process. And make no mistake about it, when you bring in that many people, think about the kind of people who are now getting access to information and to be able to transact through the smartphones. I mean, one question I've always had is, are they going to tender for the global population through their Google and Amazon wallets, and we'll end up with, the guys who are running the dollar system now end up absolutely supreme, whether they call it dollar or Bitcoin. They'll have everybody on their smartphones using Google wallets, and no government will have any sovereignty if the U.S. system has everybody on Google and Facebook.
And that, to me, and is this what you're saying, is this the end game objective here, ultimately for control, consolidation, centralization? And
I don't know. I think they believe you have to rebalance the global economy, and I think they believe, a digital currency which is completely transparent to them has the lowest transaction costs and gives them the most power and control. So it's the logical place for them to go. At the same time, What we need to step back and say is we don't understand why they're doing what they're doing because we don't understand the risks. I mean, if you look at the way a lot of the black money, budget money has been invested, we don't know the risks that they're concerned about. We don't know the environmental risks they're concerned about. We're not sure about the nuclear risks that they're concerned about. I mean, there are a lot of risks on this planet, so we have a lot of capital right now on the private side going out into space, lots of conversation about asteroid mining and colonies on Mars, and Elon Musk, saying, and I'm sure he's got a lot of support from this, it's crazy not to establish colonies on other planets because we should have a plan B. What happens if this planet is, the entire future of the civilization is dependent on not having an environmental disaster. So we don't know what the risk issues that they take seriously, and we don't have the information and maps that they have. And that's the one thing I think we need to remember, because if you look at the sudden hysteria and speed from 80 on with which they've pulled money out and been up to whatever this breakaway plan is, it looks to me like they're afraid of something. Now, the question is what? Are they simply afraid that if they don't globalize in this way and they leave it to the general economy, then the Anglo-American alliance will end up, poor and killed by the Chinese? It could be as simple as that. I don't know. But for some reason, they're pushing hard and fast to lead the centralization with themselves in control.
All right. Wow. That when you contemplate the enormity of that, you're at least my mind can go in a number of different directions, and it is difficult to attempt to make sense of.
Well, let
me
me tell you one. Let me tell you one story that I think might help. In 1997, I was working, as I told you, with this group of pension fund leaders. Wonderful group of people, very concerned about making sure the pension funds achieved the targets they needed to provide for the boomers' retirement. And I had a plan on how to re-engineer government investment. If you re-engineer government investment, finance places with equity, bring in new technology, the wealth that can be created is just you wouldn't even believe me if I told you. I mean, we have 1% of the wealth that we could if you could do this. Anyway, so I brought forward a plan, and it was before I knew about a lot of the technology that I'm aware of now. And I laid it all out, and the president of CalPERS, the largest pension fund in the country, looked at me, and he said, I don't understand. He had worked for Solinsky. He said, this was Alinsky's model, and they stopped him. And I said, yeah, but they didn't have the Internet. They didn't have the tools. Of course, I was wrong. He was right. And he froze, and he looked at me, and he said, you don't understand. It's too late. They've given up on the country. They're moving all the money out starting in the fall. And that fall was October 1997 when all the money started disappearing from the federal budget. Again, as I said, over $8.5 trillion that we know of. And then we had the pump and dump of the stock market, and then we had the bailouts. In combination, my estimate is $40 trillion gone. Okay? And so when he said they have given up on the country, what he meant was, I believe, that when the budget squabble happened in 95 and they tried very hard to implement a fiscal, a financial plan to get a balanced budget, they realized it's hopeless. What we'll do is we'll pull all the money out and then we'll let everybody stew in their own juices. And that's why I think if Geithner said we're running out the dollar, we are now in the end game of stewing their own juices. And the reality is we have several constituencies. We're debasing everyone in the world globally by printing more dollars or treasuries and forcing them to take it. So everybody's getting debased globally, whether it's your and my pension fund or, people in Indonesia, or certainly the Chinese. And so we're debasing everybody, and then we're giving the money to three parties. One is the military to keep the system going. One is to pay interest on the debt to keep the system going. And then the third is to pay, everybody in the U.S. federal budget, including all the retirees. And the question is, which one are you going to stop paying first? So it's a balance between debasing the globe, yet again, versus squeezing one of those three constituencies.
Well, speaking of debasement, and this is something that has been the subject of conversation with us on many programs. Many people have asked, well, when is the great devaluation going to take place? And everyone's looking for some sudden, black swan moment, or some sudden, wake up on a Monday morning and find out that instead of having $100,000 in their IRA, they have $20,000 or some variation of that. And I know that you contend that we're in a period of steady debasement, where this confiscation of wealth has been taking place.
Since 1913, we've confiscated 99 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
Your money's already been confiscated.
Yeah, exactly. Which brings me to your comments on the war in the middle class. I think that right now, and Joe and I were talking about this earlier. I think that the middle class is the vanishing class, of course, and that we're in the crosshairs of the battle in which we find ourselves. And
we got choked on. We choked on our own false prosperity. I mean, here's the thing: the middle class got bought into a lie. They got tricked. They got bought off sides. They got seduced off sides, and now we're in a very politically, we're. Let me go back and tell you a story. In the summer of 2000, I was giving a speech to a group called Spiritual Frontiers Foundation International. They have a conference once a year to talk about how they can help our society evolve spiritually. Very intelligent, very committed people. So I had an audience of about 100 people, and I had been asked to give a speech called How the Money Works in Organized Crime, which later became an article, very famous article I wrote called Narco Dollars for Beginners. And it was designed to help people understand the financial relationship between illegal activities in Wall Street and Washington, but do it in a light, fun way so it's not too depressing. So I'm in the middle of the speech, and I'm describing the Dark Alliance allegations and the fact that Congress had hearings on hearings in, I think it was 98 or 99, I think it's 98, on the Dark Alliance allegations about drug dealing by the intelligence agencies, and part of this was a memorandum of understanding had been written between the CIA and the Department of Justice, relieving the CIA of any obligation to report drug dealing by essentially anybody other than a case officer, which if you could use government money to pay all these contractors to do classified things, it would then include them. So it's part of putting the legal structure in place for all these shenanigans. Anyway, so I described this, and so I said to these wonderful group of people, at the time, the Department of Justice told a reporter I was working with that the U.S. economy launders $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of all dirty money. And so that's as of about 97 and 98. So I said to this wonderful group of spiritually evolved people, what would happen if we stopped being the global leader in money laundering? And they said, well, the stock market would go down because that money would go to Shanghai or Singapore or London, not come to the United States, leave the New York Stock Exchange, and we'd have trouble financing the government deficit because that money would leave our bond market and go elsewhere, and and our taxes might go up, and the government budget may have to get cut back. And I said, okay, let's pretend there's a big red button up here on the lectern, and if you push that button, you can stop all hard narcotics trafficking in your neighborhood, your county, your state tomorrow, thus offending the people who control $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of all dirty money and the accumulated capital thereon. So out of 100 people dedicated to evolving our society spiritually, guess how many would push the button?
I'm afraid to ask.
One. So I said to the other 99, why would you not push the button? They said, we don't want our taxes to go up. We don't want our government checks to stop. We don't want our IRAs to go down. And I said, so what you're saying is you want the intelligence agencies and the enforcement agencies to continue to distribute drugs to your neighbor's children to keep your IRAs high.
And there it is, folks. Folks, I hope you heard that. And my fears, of course, just became realized. So people will choose the lucre over the over what's right, over the spiritual health.
Well, yeah. Look at what the banks have done.
Here's what I just. Sorry.
Go ahead, Catherine.
I'm being too chatty. Here's what I discovered. The problem was not that they wouldn't push the red button. The problem was that they were too afraid to discuss it, because the reality is, if we can talk about it, then we can figure out how to turn the red button green, which means we can make money pushing the red button. Because the reality is, drugs don't make the body politic stronger. They don't make an economy stronger. They liquidate an economy. Just like genetically modified food liquidates an economy, or gambling and casinos liquidate an economy. So you can't build economic muscle by liquidating an economy. So narco dollars destroy and liquidate economies. They don't build them up. And so the question we all have to ask is, how can we re-engineer it? And the reality is to make those changes requires re-engineering our behavior. I've never been in a county where if we weren't willing to just take the time we spend watching TV, just take half the time, and take the money we spend on the lottery or the money we spend on illegal drugs or excessive pharmaceuticals, and just put that money to building venture capital for local business and scholarships for kids and internships for kids, we could rebuild the economy, no problem. But it's going to take, it's going to take a very deep spiritual and then cultural conversation. Spiritual because we have built up a field of violation spiritually, place by place and network by network, which is extraordinary. And we need to cleanse that. We need to, get down on our knees and say, Lord, forgive me. I take responsibility. Help me clean up my act. I call it coming clean. So there's a coming clean process that has to happen. And then there is a creation, person by person. It's got to be a person thing individually first, where we say, something, this is my problem. I'm going to take responsibility for it, and I'm going to do what I can. I'm going to turn my red button green. I'm going to stop making money by doing things that hurt other people.
Amen.
If we just all shunned, I can't tell you how powerful. I'll never forget. I'm going to tell you another story. I was at a great Christian revival. It was a busy year. It was 2000 again, and the minister brought in George W. Bush by monitor to speak to the group. He's from Dallas, and 100,000 Christian women, African American, leaped up cheering for George W. Bush, including my pastor, who was teaching me spiritual warfare at the time. And I said to her afterwards, look, there's nothing, she used to work at the DEA. I said, there's nothing about Bush family and Clinton family narcotics trafficking that you don't know. Now, you just jumped up cheering for him. Why is that? And she said, he's going to be the winner. And I said, look, I almost lost my life and certainly my fortune trying to stop that kind of narcotics trafficking. You never jumped up and cheered for me. And she said, well, he's a winner and you're a loser.
Wow.
But I have to tell you, if tomorrow every person in America said, something, I'm not going to talk to, I'm not going to associate with, I'm not going to invite over to my house for dinner, I'm not going to speak to, I'm not going to sleep with, I'm not going to date, anybody who is overtly doing this stuff, what do you think would happen?
There'd be a lot of inactivity, to be sure, but, along with repentance, we could change the world, couldn't we?
Yeah, I think so. But, this comes down to each person individually. Am I going to make money or do things that harm others? what am I going to do that is productive, that can provide a livelihood for me and my family that serves others? Because we're either going to make our money liquidating others or we're going to make our money serving others. And it's an individual choice, and the responsibility ultimately, the responsibility for enforcement has to come down to the individual because the government can't do it. The government doesn't have the information and financial sovereignty to implement it, and it certainly can't. If I made you president tomorrow, you'd walk into the Oval Office and your political guy would say, the American people just spent $1 billion to get you elected. They all want their check. And you turn to the Secretary of Treasury and say, you better be nice to the guys who control $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of all dirty money because, the most financially enlightened people don't want you to push the red button. They want you to keep it up.
But you know what, Catherine? I'd like to think that I would be different, that I could make a difference. I would be more spiritually pure.
You can make a tremendous difference. Every one of us. And the first thing, and I can prove to you you're already doing it, because the most important thing we have to have is a conversation about what in the world are we doing and why are we doing this and how can we do something different. That is step one. And because one person can do an enormous amount, absolutely enormous amount. One person not being afraid means two people cannot be afraid, three people not being afraid, four people not being afraid, having an honest conversation, talking about how the money works. Okay, how can we make it work differently? So I would say you're already doing an enormous amount.
Well, as you are as well, through your interviews, of course, through your Solari report, of course, your Dylan Reed and Company Incorporated, and the aristocracy of stock profits, folks. That's also linked off of our website, HomelandSecurityUS.com. This, to me, is an amazing interview based on my expectations going in and hearing what you've got to say and really tying in the spiritual and the personal responsibility, the moral aspects of things with a greater picture. And I want to thank you for this. Folks, you should find a lot of value in this. My goodness.
Well, you're awfully nice.
Well, and you're awfully refreshing, and you're awfully effective in terms of getting the point across. And the personal responsibility aspect of this is so extremely important because everyone's looking for the answers elsewhere when, in fact, we've got many of the answers here within. And it's going to cause us to change our way of thinking, our way of life first before we can expect any changes to be made on the whole, so to speak.
Right. I can do all things through Christ.
Amen. That's absolutely correct. And again, it's refreshing to hear that said from someone of your esteemed background and understanding where you came from, what you've been through. It would be so easy.
Here's the thing, I'll never forget. I had a wonderful friend who became a Buddhist, and she came back from the ceremony, and she looked terrible. I said, "What went wrong?" And she said, "Oh, my God, I've had to accept personal responsibility for world peace." She said, "I'm only one person. How am I supposed to do that?" So this is a new concept. But I think, it's very interesting when they seized, when the Department or the FBI, it was the FBI and the HUD Inspector General seized our offices and sort of, I watched millions of dollars and years of work just destroyed in a week. And when that happened, I'm a great believer, I like to have a plan, I like to have goals, I like things to be clear and coherent. And suddenly, everything I had been building and working for was destroyed, and I had to start again from scratch. So I took out a piece of paper and tried to write down my goals, what my goals were. And this went on for months, and I would write something, and I'd say, no, that's not it. And finally I went to church, and we had a co-pastor who worked up a huge head of steam. I don't know about what, but she was really full of fire that day. And she said, she was kind of talking to the woman, and she said, "Honey, you don't need a house. You don't need a man." And she pointed, it felt like she was pointing right at me, and she said, "You need to get in right relationship with the Lord." And I said, it's like a bomb went off in my head. I said, oh, that's what I need, because I'm in a situation which is too chaotic. I have too little information. I have to operate on faith. I don't need to worry about the whole thing. I just need to worry about what the boss asks me to do today.
Amen.
So
and
I need to get in right relationship and stay in right relationship. And if I can do that, then I will find the pathway through.
Yeah, and so many people today, especially in the church, are looking to exterior solutions for spiritual problems. And one of our guests, Steve Quayle, often says, there's no political solution to a spiritual problem. And that's, what we're going through today. And it's our minds that need to be reorganized to fit what the Lord has in store for us, not what we want, and trying to fit that when what the Lord wants for us. We need to look to Him first and foremost, because, I think it's a saying in AA or the 12-step groups is, you can't love somebody else until you learn to love yourself. It's
right.
The same thing with your plan on earth. You can't go against the current. If God wants you to do something and you're trying to do something else, it's not going to be smooth. You're going to have a rough time. But once you're doing the will of the Lord, things get much easier. And not many people pick up on that. We have a society that wants the fast, instant solution. What do they call it? The instant gratification. They want what they want now.
I would love personally a fast, instant solution.
Yeah, who wouldn't? But it's the trials that you go through that build your character and help mold you to the people that you turn out to be.
Well, here's the one thing I will say. If you look at, you and I both know, because you guys come from what I would describe as the enforcement line. If you got an army of 1,000 guys with machine gun up against, 100 guys who have water pistols, we know who's probably going to win. Okay? Now, I don't always believe that, because the story of Gideon is my favorite story in the Bible. But the reality is, if you look at a person growing up in America and who isn't clued into what's going on, and you look at the firepower that is targeted at them, entrainment technology, subliminal programming, TV, media, sex, bad food, blah, 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 blah. To me, it's amazing that any of these kids make it to 21 and turn out coherent. So if you look at the firepower that's turned on the average American to kind of corrupt their mind and their soul, it's pretty extraordinary.
Indeed it is. You make a very good point. Yeah, and I've heard you talk about the various things, including but not limited to the GMO, and of course the war on farms, even,
right.
And how the fractured economy, the food supply, and of course you're big on homeschooling, and of course non-GMO food supply and such. And I've heard you talk about this. So yeah, I'm amazed as well that all things considered, yeah, it's amazing that we're surviving.
One of my favorite moments on the Solari Report, have you ever interviewed Dr. Gwen Scott?
No.
She's an expert. She's a nutritionist who's expert on the impact physically of chemtrails. Just a brilliant, capable woman. And I did a debriefing or a pre-briefing of her before we did the Solari Report. And I have to tell you, it was the single most depressing content I'd ever had to deal with. So I literally laid down and prayed for an hour. And I got up and I called her back and I said, I've got it. We're not going to talk about what chemtrails does to your body. We're going to talk about the 10 action steps you can take to deal with it, because it's too depressing to even talk about. We need to go immediately to action steps. And she listened and she said, well, that's all very well nice and good, but you forgot the most important one. I said, what's that? She said, grace. If it wasn't for grace, if you look at everything that's going on, we should be dead, but we're not, so something else is happening.
Very well said. Wow. And folks, definitely go to Catherine Austin Fitt's website, solari.com. That's SOLARI.com. It's a hard link on HomelandSecurityUS.com on the right-hand side. And certainly, I would definitely sign up for the Solari report. There are various options there, as well as some interesting videos, including just a taste of the road ahead, just Taste of Hero Edition, and so on. You've got such a variety of content. I wanted to ask you before the close of this hour, what is contained exactly for the listeners who are not familiar with the Solari report? How would you describe it, and what's contained therein?
Well, what we're interested in doing is looking across your whole balance sheet and income statement on an integrated basis. So it's a kind of a systems approach. And what we're interested in is helping you be successful according to what you say your purpose is. So I believe that each individual and each family is unique. And, they serve a purpose. They have people and things that they love. And so I think everything has to organize around that. But what I'm trying to do is help you see the world on an integrated basis and then act across your balance sheet and income statement to make sure you're navigating this environment and are successful in this environment. So, and of course that takes us into looking at things. So most people are focused on finance, don't put as much stress as I do on health and sort of how you use your time, your habits, because I think it's, if you look at where people get in trouble and lose money, it's because they don't make sure their mind is clear and healthy. They don't make sure their body is clean and healthy. They don't make sure their soul is clean and healthy. And those, the failure to do that is how you get trapped and hooked on the money. So I'm a great believer that if you're going to avoid financial fraud, then you have to have a clear mind, and that means you have to have a clear body. And it's better to have a clear soul because, that's part of what they hook you on is your own greed and sin. So anyway,
True.
So we look at things on a very integrated basis, and because I think in this, so for example, let me give you another example. If you look at the balance sheet and income statement of the average family, they've been intermediated. In other words, they go to work for the corporation, then they go to the corporate store and buy stuff, and then they go home, and because they're too tired to do something, they hire the corporation to come in. And basically, if you look at their income statement balance sheet, they've got intermediaries running up and down. And given that technology is changing the fundamental economics, it makes tremendous sense to re-engineer and in many cases disintermediate those players out of your balance sheet and income statement. So I'll never forget, I had a dear friend once who called me and said she constantly was complaining about the yields on her portfolio going down and her water bill going up. I said, this is really simple. Sell your stocks and build a well. Just disintermediate the players out of your balance sheet and income statement. And, of course, she was in a rural area, so it made tremendous economic sense for her to do. She did.
Yeah, very interesting.
She's probably healthier because she's consuming a lot less fluoride. So there you have it. So
very true.
Right. So that's an example where you need to look holistically, because the way we're operating is, our health and our minds are very much related to what's happening in our money. And, I will tell you now, if your mind is not clear and you don't have a good map of what's going on, you're probably not going to make it through.
When you say not make it through what's coming, I suspect is what you mean. And
I mean, you're not going to make it through what's here. If you look at, for example, the statistics of people who are taking psychiatric drugs, many of whom probably don't need to be doing it, they're going to have more car accidents. They're going to have more health problems. I could go on and on. But if you can't see the risks you're navigating and your mind isn't clear to help you do it, then statistically you're just going to fall prey to more of those risks.
Excellent advice. You know what, folks? What a wonderful conversation we're having with Catherine Austin Fitts. Just the combination of, well, the whole life approach, the holistic approach, finances, spiritual health, physical health, all of this combined. It's not one thing; it's everything. And you know what? After I had published on our website that you were going to be a guest tonight, I must have received, well, I've got right now probably close to 4 dozen emails with different questions all over the board in terms of topic matter. People have heard you on other programs wanting your takes on different things, from current events, what's going on in Ukraine, and of course the Israel action against the terrorists in Gaza, and even your take on the precious metals. And I know that you had mentioned that earlier in one of your earlier interviews about how, you know, what you think about the metals, and of course all things in between. So, you know, and I want to thank you for being so gracious with your time, especially on a Friday evening with us. Hopefully you won't mind, as we come back on the other side, taking a few of these questions. We'll be brief. And I just want to extend again my thanks to you. What a pleasant surprise. What a wonderful interview, ladies and gentlemen, with Catherine Austin Fitts. Please bookmark her website, Solari.com. Again, linked off of HomelandSecurityUS.com. Click on the right-hand side. Also, the link to her book as well is there. And sign up for the Solari Report. What a wonderful, to me, just what a wonderful holistic approach to your life.
Ladies and gentlemen, to our third and final hour this Friday, July 18th edition of the Hagmann Hagmann Report. One quick announcement before we jump back into the interview with our guest, Catherine Austin Fitts. Is on Sunday we will be joining Brother Marcus and his son Curtis on Pine Ridge Warriors from 9 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. That's Pine Ridge Warriors right here on BTR with Brother Marcus and Curtis for 2 hours on Sunday night.
And don't forget tomorrow to tune into the weekend edition of the Hagmann Hagmann Report with Sheila Zielinski, the weekend vigilante. Of course, our guest tomorrow night will be Tom Horn, and W Intelligence Insider, who, by the way, thanks Catherine Austin Fitts by his email here, is an absolute terrific guest, as does Wiley P., saying, fantastic show. Catherine Austin Fitts shows great courage and truth. Thank you, Wiley. Catherine, thank you for hanging with us. I've got a number of questions directed to you, and they're concerning a range of topics. Do you feel like entertaining a few of these?
Sure.
All right. The first question, and this is from Rebecca, from listening live, by the way, in Jerusalem. She had called in here recently. In fact, she had sent me an email recently during our showtime when she was listening to us in a fallout type shelter, which is during the hostilities. She wants to know what your thoughts are on the global economic ramifications of the current situation taking place in her area there in Israel and Gaza, and more than that, what you see taking place with respect to the entirety of the Israeli situation and the hostile neighborhood in which they reside.
Right. So I am far from expert, so take everything I say with a big grain of salt. My guess is what's happening is the situation with Russia and the tensions over the Ukraine has Europe very concerned about gas supplies, and Israel wants to control the gas deposits off the Gaza, and with Europe needing them, I think what's probably happened behind the scenes is a deal that Europe and the United States will be tolerant of Israel going in and asserting whatever they want to do in the Gaza to put themselves in a position to control and develop those gas deposits all the time when, we'll be saying publicly, isn't it terrible, don't do it. But I think a decision has been made to give Israel free hand to do what they wish in the Gaza, and while they're there are also water and land issues that will be dealt with. So to me, this is a bit of a resource war, and I think the genocide that's been occurring is going to get worse. So I don't think it's a pretty situation, and I think it's the problem is the powers that be have decided, okay, we're going to give Israel a free hand because we need the gas.
So, yeah, wow. You're not seeing a very happy ending from all of this, just from your personal perspective, then.
I think the Palestinians do not have the political support they need to be protected.
I got you.
Now,
all right.
The thing that can change that is, and here's the challenge. If you look at the politicians who are, making deals, and again, this is pure conjecture. I'm just looking at this and making a guess. If you look at the politicians who may be making those deals, they're facing elections where everybody's screaming at them about rising gas prices and rising food prices. So, the resource wars come back to us, and it's the red button problem.
Very well said, and nicely done, too, on that. Nicely tied back to that. Very good. Okay. And moving along here, again, because I've got about 2 pages of questions, and we're never going to get to all these questions, folks. Just kind of a heads up there. Vicki from New Hampshire, in light of the most recent events involving Flight 17, Malaysian Flight 17, and I'm paraphrasing here, and the current events in Ukraine, well, let me distill this down. She ultimately wants to know, could this be about energy, more about energy and, as in your word just now, resources, than about anything else?
Well, the battle over the Ukraine, and remember, this really heated up when the Ukraine, who'd agreed to step into the European Union or to take the first step, switch hit and said, no, we won't, with Russia offering more. So a lot of this is about where sort of, is that turf under the European umbrella or under the Russian umbrella? So if you look at what the Ukraine is, it's a couple of things. It's clearly, if you look at their role in the pipelines and energy, it's very, very important. So it's part of the oil and gas and pipeline issue, but it's also an enormous breadbasket. So it's both, to me, the Ukraine is both food and energy. But it's also where the dance of trying to keep Germany in the European fold and the Chinese and Russians from kind of getting together and ganging up on us. Remember, if the Russians, the Chinese, and the Germans should ever get together, then the United States is really going to have a problem. So it's part of a dance that's been going on for quite some time. But to me, this is about both energy and food, and it was simply unfortunate the way the Ukraine, sort of played its card because it made a mess and got the thing going. There's one point to stress about the Ukraine, which I think is very important and very rarely discussed, and that is when the wall came down, you had Poland, Russia, and the Ukraine all having a per capita income of about $5,000 a year. I think a year or two ago, Poland and Russia was at about $20,000 per person, and the Ukraine was still at about $5,000 or $6,000. And what happens is when a territory doesn't develop on its own, the powers that be go in and it's kind of a use it or lose it situation. And so I think you had a country that hadn't grown with Poland and Russia and the rest of the bloc, and so were easily picked over by a lot of corporate and private interests, and now you've got a mess.
Yeah, a mess indeed. Could this, now this is from me, obviously, could what we're seeing here in Ukraine I mean, to me, it looks, in the larger sense, it looks like we're fighting a proxy war. And I've written an article about this several. Go ahead.
Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, no, I've written several articles about this, and it seems to me like we're fighting a proxy war against Russia, and we're seeing a Russian-China alliance shaping up financially and also in terms of military and other resources. And it seems like we're fighting this. We're fighting Russia and this alliance by proxy.
Well, I'm not. Here's the thing. This comes back to where I feel very ignorant sometimes because we don't have good sources of information. It looks to me, it's very interesting. At the beginning of the year, the defense contractor stocks had done quite marvelously despite all the threats of budget cuts and sequestration and everything else. And when you read the analyst reports, they said, oh, don't worry, our earnings won't go down. They're going to be replaced by foreign sales. So when the Ukraine went along, I said, oh, how convenient. We're having a war. I wonder if there's a relationship now. Who knows? But it has looked to me more than once like Putin's getting a little help and encouragement from factions inside the United States. So I think the story here may be a little bit murkier than it looks. Particularly with Snowden in Russia. Snowden, in my mind, could never have gotten to where he got without some help from the United States, whether he's consciously aware of it or not. And so I think there's a more complex story going on, and that includes the fact that you have enormous oil interests in. One of my questions is during the rape of Russia in the 90s. The Dutch, my impression is that the Dutch picked up quite a lot of oil interests and, of course, do a great business, including in Russia. And so I find it very interesting that there were 154 Dutch citizens on that plane. So, because the oil companies have very quietly been trying to calm down the rhetoric and the sanctions, it's not good for business. And apparently you have a lot of corporate interest in Germany as well. The interesting thing is we're seeing a situation where a lot of corporations are pushing for, détente in diplomacy and to stop fighting. And the governments who've now, of course, the corporations have all the money now, and the government are stuck with a liability. So it's the governments who are desperate and need to go out and, get more money. So I just think there's a deeper story that we don't quite understand here.
I've got to agree with you on that. And there was another question I breezed by that had to do with Snowden and what you thought of Snowden, and if there could be a level of complicity, by our own government here as well. So I think you've kind of answered that and explained it. Okay. Yeah, things are murky. Things are indeed murky.
Welcome to the Puzzle Palace.
Yeah. Cecil, listening live in Kentucky, I'm worried. He says, I'm worried about my money, my wealth.
Right.
Quite a lengthy email. Best way to protect would you recommend, as others have, preservation of wealth? And again, I'm paraphrasing here: preservation of wealth into precious metals, as opposed to paper, like IRAs and other paper investments.
Well, I'm a great believer in balance. So I have two blog posts called one's called Coup d'etat, a financial coup d'etat, and the other's called Beyond Diversification, and they're linked together. And then I have another one called What Percentage of My Assets Should I Hold in Precious Metals? And then I've got all sorts of stuff in the Solari report on financial stuff. But the reality is there's no magic bullet here. We have a political problem. If you walk into my house, put a gun to my head, there is no financial solution to that. In other words, so it's good to remember you can't solve a political problem with a financial solution. Now, that said, the political problem we have is a lot more subtle. It's working through the financial system, so there are things you can do that that help. Now, to me, I would recommend you read the blog posts on precious metals. But basically, what I say is, I think you should have a core position because precious metals are very useful. You can put them in your pocket, walk away, do a deal with somebody. There's no record of it. It's private and it's a store of value. It's clearly, from a price standpoint, highly volatile, and you just have to remember, I have a core position for the worst case. For your investment position, we're clearly in either a serious consolidation or a bear market. We don't know which. And you just need to remember that it could be either. I think there's about 80% chance that we're in a serious consolidation. The primary trend will reassert. But when and how that will happen, there are many different scenarios. So you just have to be prepared for it to be either. So I would have a core position and an investment position. I talk a little bit about how to handle the investment position in that blog post. I don't believe in having all my assets in any one thing. The most important thing you can put your assets in are your health and your skills and your knowledge and your mind. Because if you can be useful and serve other people in a way that is economic and generates an income for you, then you're always useful. I live in a small farming community, and I have neighbors who, I swear to you, the apocalypse could come tomorrow, and the next day, they'd be making breakfast for somebody, and somebody'd be paying them to make breakfast for them. You know what I mean? Because they're perpetually and seriously useful. And, every year they're learning new things, new skills. They fix their own cars, they build their own houses. I mean, it's just unbelievable what they can do. So I think we need to serve other people, and we need to serve them in ways that are economically productive for them and us. So protect your house, build your skills, do all of that. Okay, then go through your balance sheet and income statement and say, where is it economic and energizing me for me to do more for myself? As I said, sell the stock and build the well. So the more you can not be dependent on services where inflation could kick up or costs could kick up and whack you is good. And then from then on, I would have my investments in a balance of things, some of which would be securities, and depending on your skills and network, some of which would be, real estate or private equity, but in assets that make sense to you, that you understand. One of the reasons I never owned Enron stock was I couldn't figure out what in the world they did. And I thought they were a bunch of scummy people. So, I don't invest in people who I think are scummy, and I try and stay in assets I understand that I think are doing something useful and will be doing something useful, 10 years from now. So
wow. Simple as that. Yeah.
It's all very simple. You, if you go back and you look at the old families that have managed intergenerational wealth through centuries, these are all the practices and rules they follow, and I describe them in some of that blog post. If I had one book I would recommend to you to read on protecting your wealth in this environment, it's a book by James Hughes Jr. It's called Family Wealth, and it's about how to turn your family into a conspiracy that helps each other be successful. The greatest risk management entity ever created is not the corporation; it's the family. And the reality is, if families start to conspire together to really help each other succeed, the frightening thing in American culture is whether it's TV or all sorts of other things, they're teaching people how to denigrate each other and themselves and tear each other down. And there's nothing worse than to see a family that tears each other down as opposed to a family that conspires to really help each other be successful. And Family Wealth is a great book with lots of great ideas about how to start to think about how to do that. Hughes is a very successful, prominent attorney who advises wealthy families on how to keep wealth. But what's interesting is if you look at all the technology he lays out about how wealthy families can stay wealthy, it's the same technology to help families get wealthy.
Very good. Very good. Wow. Okay. I'm sorry. The name of that book again is
Family Wealth by James Hughes.
Family Wealth by James Hughes. we're building a virtual library here of recommended works. Family Wealth by James Hughes.
That's a great one. Another one you have to get is Deep Survival by Lawrence Gonzalez.
Okay.
Both of those,
Deep
in fact, did interviews on the Solari Report. Great interviews.
All right, very good. I appreciate the recommendations. Lily from San Bernardino wants to know your thoughts on the German gold repatriation.
Yeah, Germany recently made a one of their gold back from the U.S. Federal Reserve, and I think they received 10% of their gold, and then there was a report that 45% of the gold that the Fed was holding for Germany has been missing, or is missing.
Here's the reality. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the total global gold inventory was, where it is, and how it's managed. And it's one of those things that I believe, we don't know. The facts are not available. And at this point, I don't believe a word of the official statistics. The reality is, after World War II, the people who lost just happened to wake up and find all their gold, down at the Federal Reserve, being held, quote unquote, for them, not to mention all the loot that got put in the hidden stores and created the hidden system of finance. So their gold ended up, either in the United States or under the control of the United States. Now the question is, how much of that has disappeared back, as a result of the trade deficit and all the things we know about the shenanigans of the U.S. financing? And the reality is we don't know. So the one question I have is, we saw gold rise from 2000 to 2011 and then suddenly smash down. If you look at the large gold ETF, GLD, ticker symbol GLD, it built up a huge inventory and suddenly it slammed down. I took one look at it and I said, did we just do a trade for the moon? What was that? Well, think about it. I mean, when you do a huge deal in finance, you have to inventory, you have to stockpile and build. It's always pretty tricky to build some huge inventory. So, did we stockpile that gold and move it into, the central banks around the world so we could auger in a new digital currency? Did we buy the moon? I don't know what the story was. I think you can waste the one thing you cannot afford to do in this environment is to waste time on, I'll give you an example. The average American watches 2 hours and 46 minutes of TV, according to the latest article in the Wall Street Journal about 4 weeks ago. It's up 10 minutes 10 minutes per American since last year. So that turns out, if you multiply out the minutes, that's 1,000 hours a year, which is 50% of a federal staff year. So, but then if you look at how much time we all spend on the Internet chasing down the conjecture of adult fairy tales, like where'd the gold really go? That's another way we lose enormous amounts of time. And I think it's very important in situations like this to say, something, we don't know. We really don't know. Now, I do believe what we can guess as to probabilities. It's clear the United States is taking its sweet time about returning the gold to Germany, and I think Germany's in for what, my grandmother used to call a real taffy pull to get that gold back. So that's going to take time, and God knows what could happen. There is probably a connection between Goldman Sachs and the New York Fed slamming the gold down, and Germany wanting a little bit of it back.
Understood. All right. Kind of a almost a related question in a way, but maybe not. This is from Samuel G., listening live from Vancouver, British Columbia, writing to ask about. There's a reference there to the gold and Goldman Sachs property in Lower Manhattan, and the fact that it was sold to the Chinese, and of course the vault below, and so on and so forth. And the rumors of the tunnel between the 10-story underground vault to the Fed. But having said all of that, the essence of Samuel's question from Vancouver is he wants to know about China, the threat China poses to the economic stability of the world, as well as the threat China poses to the economic and or just general security of the United States.
Well, China is a very interesting country, and one of the reasons is it's so big. I mean, you've got more than 1 billion people, and so for example, right now they're about if the world economy has a GDP of about 74 trillion, the U.S. is about 16 or 17 trillion. This is as of last year, and China's about 9 trillion. Now that's come up from 10 years ago, 2 trillion. So they're growing at dramatic rates, and we're basically relatively flat. We expect by about 2025 or 2030 for our GDP to be equivalent. Now, there are, over 1 billion people, we're only 300 million people. So, on a per capita basis, we're still much richer. But there's no doubt about it that if you look at the primacy that the U.S. has had as an economic matter, it is being replaced by Asia, and that's all part of the rebalancing of the global economy. It's not bad or good, it just is. Now, if you look at the false prosperity that we've had for the last 10 to 15 years, that was engineered with Chinese productivity, and with that Chinese productivity generating the cash that was used to finance the debt we used to engineer the false prosperity. If you want to understand China and our relationship with China and the opportunity to have that relationship go in a healthy way, I cannot recommend more highly what I consider to be sort of the top business economic book of the year, which is Unbalanced by Steve Roach at Yale, who used to be vice chairman for Morgan Stanley in Asia, having been for almost 30 years Morgan Stanley's chief economist, and the one person on Wall Street who kept warning about the fragility in the financial system and the fact that a financial crisis could happen. So don't ever say that somebody didn't warn you. One of the top Wall Street economists did warn and warn and warn, and he's now written a fantastic book about what the issues are with China and how we could rebalance out of them. If you look at our society, we are consuming. We have a very high consumption rate in our society. They have a very high productivity rate. They're going to have to raise their consumption. We're going to have to lower ours and raise our productivity. And it's one of the reasons I suspect you see real efforts by a lot of companies, particularly with robotics and the kind of automation that's coming in to bring a lot of manufacturing and other things here. I really think there's a reasonably good chance our industrial base is going to redevelop. And I just did a salary report called Megatrends with Jim Poplava that's very good, and it goes all into that. But I don't see China as being the evil empire. I see the Chinese as being unbelievably hardworking, unbelievably, given their size, a real juggernaut, and in that sense, serious competition for the United States. At the same time, if you look at many of the hostilities between us, we've treated them brutally, and now they're treating us brutally, and the question is, can we get into a more virtuous circle? Okay.
All right. Hopefully that answers your question, and I think it does. It kind of, there's a different perspective there, ladies and gentlemen, from perhaps other people, you've heard on our show. Interesting perspective indeed.
I should just say one thing, and I have to
Sure.
I have to confess, just as a warning, I used to work at Goldman Sachs. I was a summer intern in '77, but I lived in Hong Kong for years studying Chinese, and then I was in the process of negotiating several deals with the two Chinese universities when our company was sort of targeted by the Department of Justice. And I will say this, the Chinese people are, they are a wonderful people. They are a marvelous people. They are remarkable people. And, the way to understand China, good and bad, it's got a lot of different facets, and some I like and some terrify me. But the way to understand China is to get on a plane or a boat and go over there. And I think you'll find that if you take the time to travel around China, it's quite fascinating, and you'll come back never quite the same.
Okay. I have a neighbor who, through his job, was sent over to China, and he spent, in total, probably 3 months. Now, this is over a 24-month period. And he said the people are tremendous. The government is a little bit, well, not a little bit, definitely much different than here. And, of course, the
citizens, I mean, they have the number one growing Christian population in the world.
Yeah, they do. So.
Oh, I didn't know that. Do you know what the Christian population in China is?
Well, Joe,
no, I don't, but I know that they're the fastest growing nation of Christians at the moment, according to reports.
Yeah, that surprised me when I heard it earlier. Yeah, it's amazing. But I did learn a lot from my neighbor, who said, the Chinese people are different than one might expect. Of course, separating that, of course, from the leadership there. Let me pull this up here. Did I address Gene from Columbus, Ohio, that question?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. No, I didn't, because, Catherine, this is an interesting question. And, in fact, I heard you mention something about this, about the dangers presented by Fukushima, or the unknown dangers presented by Fukushima. And there appeared to be, I think I might have heard you say something about the event that caused the tsunami in Fukushima perhaps wasn't what it might appear to have been. Do you care to elaborate on that? This also from
I don't know. I've tried to find out. I'm very interested in what the environmental damage could be from Fukushima, both in Japan and the oceans, in the globe. And I have never been able to find a source that I felt, really I could trust. And there's such widely different opinions that it's one of those topics where I just pull my hair out. But it's one of the things that worries me. I think one of the biggest risks we face globally is the risk of, enormous environmental damage coming from these events like Fukushima, the Gulf oil spill. The reason I raised the question of what really happened was I did have an experience with the tsunami in Indonesia many years before, where I had someone who wanted to buy some world bond funds, had finally bought, after a search, one that had 15% of its principal amount in Indonesian debt, and then a week or so before the tsunami, it dropped 15% overnight for no reason, no change in interest rates, nothing. We called the sponsor, couldn't get an explanation. There was huge trading. It was a closed-end fund, and, the trading just spiked enormously. And then the tsunami happened, and the only logical explanation I could come up with was they knew. They knew, and they'd sold ahead. Now, that's
Wow.
my interpretation of events, but I will tell you, I'm a very sort of positive, action-oriented person. When something terrible happens, I try and pull up my big boy pants and say, okay, forward. And I will tell you, I did nothing but kind of sit around like, I'd been dropped from a seesaw and prayed for a week. How am I going to manage money in an environment like that? Now,
so are you saying, now, if I'm hearing this correctly, perhaps this was not a natural occurrence that you're referencing?
Well, I once had a scientist tell me that he could predict earthquakes, days ahead of time. I don't know if that's true or not. It's just what I was told. So all I can tell you is that, my interpretation of the trading patterns was ditto 9/11. I think the people who engineered that made a fortune, and if you look at the people who made a fortune trading the long bond or trading currencies, now I'm basing this on lots of anecdotes and gossip, but I think from guessing around the trading patterns that they certainly weren't Muslims. I'll tell you that, because they didn't have the financial clout and access to trade that way. So, the reality is these events get traded, and a covert operation, to the extent that it can get traded in the markets, is going to be the basis of huge profit if it's something that can move the markets. So, my interpretation of what I saw on the Indonesian tsunami was that they knew ahead of time. Now, does that mean they had the equipment to know ahead of time, or did that, and they didn't warn? They were trading it, not warning people, is what it looked like to me. Well, and if you look at what happened after the tsunami, the reports were, I think Naomi Klein's reports were that, the villagers were not allowed to move back. The beachfront property was being sold off to developers.
Interesting.
So the patterns of disaster capitalism were pretty, whatever the truth was, the patterns of disaster capitalism was a lot of people made a lot of money from that.
It's almost unthinkable in some respects. As we go into the weeds mentally, intellectually, to think that perhaps, this does occur, this can occur, this has occurred. And of course, as you so appropriately stated, we've got to face reality. We've got to be adults about this and understand that there are things out there that we don't, we don't know about.
Well, here's the thing: the secretary, this goes under the list of things we don't know that we'd like to know. The Secretary of Defense in 1997 made a speech and said, that we were up against weapons that could look like natural disasters. I think he said hurricanes and some other things. But, who knows what the truth is. But if you look at some of the financial patterns, when I see sovereign governments agree to things that make absolutely no sense, the question is, how can they be blackmailed into doing this? And I think one of the reasons they are being blackmailed into this is invisible weaponry, whether it's you've got electromagnetic weapons that can drop planes from skies, or you have electromagnetic weapons that can trigger, earthquakes. If you look at the patterns of earthquakes and the subsequent political deals, it raises very profound questions. So that gets back to, remember where I started off, which is this black budget technology. What is the black budget technology? Who controls it, and what are they using it to do? And to be perfectly blunt, one of the reasons that I've been a proponent that the dollar is not going to collapse, or is not going to collapse at the speed that others think, is because I think if you look at the invisible weaponry they have to enforce the dollar system, it's much more frightening than most people can contemplate.
Very, very interesting. And it does take a lot of grit, for lack of a better adjective, for you to come out and say that. A lot of people would shy away from questions like that. And again, we have to put our adult clothes on and understand that there's a whole other world out there. And I have heard you speak on the asymmetrical war. That there are wars that exist right now that don't consist of bullets and bombs, but certainly they're just as covert, just as effective as bombs and bullets. So, okay, that works for me. One last question here, I promise. You've been so kind and generous with your time. I've been tracking this down now for a number of years, and I have not had a reasonably good explanation for this. Now, I don't know what your level of knowledge might be. Back in 2009, June 3rd of 2009 to be exact, it appears to me that there was an attempted attack on our economy, or an unprecedented or or a criminal conspiracy, I should say, involving the United States Treasury, the Federal Reserve. Here's what happened, and this has been verified through foreign press reports. $134.5 billion in U.S. government bearer bonds, which, by the way, at that time happened to be the exact amount remaining in the U.S. TARP program, as announced by the Department of Treasury back in March of the same year. Let's see here. How can I phrase this? $134.5 billion in U.S. government bearer bonds were attempted to be smuggled across. Let me see here, into Switzerland, I believe it is. Let me check my notation here. There were two unidentified Japanese nationals illegally crossing the border into Italy. Or from Italy into Switzerland, carrying $134.5 billion in U.S. government bearer bonds and a false bottom briefcase. Have you heard about this? Did you hear about this?
Yes.
Okay. Can you clear this up for me, man? I've been chasing my tail on this for a long time.
This is one of those shaggy dog stories that you're never, I shouldn't say never, because we're always willing to get to the bottom of things, but we don't have the information we need to get to the bottom. I will say this: if you look at the hidden system of finance, it's perfectly possible, and you also look at what I suspect to be an enormous amount of Treasury and other securities that were issued either off balance sheet or, I would argue, illegally. You have enormous amounts of funny paper floating around, and the holders have every reason to believe that they have a legitimate debt of somebody or something or some government, but at the other time it's not going to be officially recognized, and you've got a real problem trading it. So the hidden system of finance, like the overt system of finance, has exploded, and I suspect that those bonds were connected to that paper. And, it just is, as the Germans are trying to make good on their gold, somebody was trying to make good on their paper. And the reality is, if you look at the level of collateral fraud within the fixed income markets, can I just tell a story? Do we have time for a story?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Okay. So this is an example of where we are and the collateral fraud. When I was running Hamilton Securities Group, I had an employee who had worked for a senator, was very high up on the Senate Finance Committee, and she came to me and said, the senator's office wants you to talk to this very important mortgage banker from New York. And I was very busy, but I said, okay, I'll talk to this guy. So I have this meeting. This guy comes in, and he's very serious, and he sits down with this huge stack of paper, and he says, my family's been in the mortgage banking business for 3 generations, and our core competency is we keep a record of all FHA mortgage insurance, and these new financial statements that HUD has just issued, as required by law starting in 1995, there's been a terrible mistake because they say there's $400 billion of mortgage insurance outstanding, and I assure you that the reality is many multiples of that. Now, I thought the guy was nuts because what he was saying was that the U.S. Treasury, the New York Fed member banks, and the Department of Justice were engaged in massive securities fraud in the trillions of dollars. I thought the guy was nuts. So he said, I brought a copy of your database. I said, no, you keep it, and I got him out of the office as fast as possible and went back to work. That took me many years later and, getting into the bailouts, but I realized, he was right. So here's the problem. You have at the heart of the financial system, we've issued far more paper than there are, so there are more mortgages than there are houses, or there were until the Fed had its quantitative easing shredding party and the Treasury had their shredding party. But, we have this kind of funny float in the financial system. There was one point where the Financial Times wrote an article saying foreigners say that we owe them $2.7 trillion more than we say we owe them. There's a big missing hole in the balance sheet. So you have these anomalies, and I have no idea, where this one fits in, but I suspect it's part of that story.
Very, very interesting story, and thank you for sharing that, because now I won't be blooding my head on the side of the are on the wall here trying to really make sense of it. I think you did a very fine job in exemplifying what's taking place. In the final moments here, anything that you have to say that we haven't covered, or you'd like to say that we haven't covered, perhaps, or covered completely here in the next few minutes?
Here's the thing: when we get into, you and I walk around in a world that is, we walk around in the official reality, but there are other, parallel realities that we're talking about. So it's a little bit like Disney World. There's the world above the ground, and then there's the world below the ground, kind of manipulating and creating the world above the ground. And so there are these different kinds of realities, and that's going on at the same time. We have cultures all over the world getting on smartphones and suddenly connecting and colliding with each other. So you can really get a headache in the, and sort of the cultural shock of it all. And I think if I had to leave everyone with any message, it's really important in this environment to stay grounded and to stay practical. It's one of the reasons I live in a farming community. If I don't stay grounded and practical, one of the farmers will kind of whack me upside the head and bring me back to ground. Or I can always, when this gets too much, I'll go out in the back and talk to my cousin's cows, because I don't know, there's something about cows that always bring me back to ground. But I think it's really important to stay grounded, and I think it's unbelievably important to be useful and to understand what your purpose is, and just be about doing it. There are 7 billion people on the planet. We're only one person, and so it comes down to, we each come here to serve a purpose, and I think it's between you and the Lord what that is. And then the question is, how can you do that in a way that's useful to the people around you? I was taking Bible class. I took a fabulous Bible class in 1998, and my teacher said to me, she said, "Can you explain the Solari model to her?" So I explained my sort of investment model for how we could kind of fix everything through the investment system, and she looked at me and she said, "Oh, you're making it much too complicated. It's in Leviticus. It says we have to take care of the land, we have to take care of ourselves, and we have to take care of each other." And I said to her, you're right. That's it.
And it is that simple when it comes right down to it. It's very simple. And isn't it interesting? We find, it's in the instruction manual for us humans. It's in the Holy Bible. Catherine Austin Fitts, I want to thank you so very much for being such a great guest and just a tremendous source of information tonight. What a pleasant conversation. What a lot of information. And I would urge everyone to visit Solari.com. That's SOLARI.com. The Solari Report. Subscribe monthly, 6 months, 1 year, and of course, just a wealth of information. And that also many other goodies accompany that subscription. Catherine, thank you so very much for your time.
Well, gentlemen,
tonight.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. You've been very patient with me. I'm usually not this chatty.
Oh, no, and thank you for being chatty, because I'm usually tongue-tied and stuttered. So.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
You guys have a great night.
Thank you, and God bless. That was Catherine Austin Fitts, folks. What a tremendous lady, really. And it gives you, folks, a different perspective, doesn't it? A different perspective. Does that mean, for example, V is incorrect? No. Does that mean Jim Willey, Jim Seclair, Gerald Saleni, they're incorrect? No. It's a different perspective. It's from all angles. And by the way, she does agree with some of them, too. So, yeah.
Now, in the closing moments of the show, we have Chance, the owner of the owner of American Survival Wholesale, on the line. We're going to go to him now.
Chance.
Blessings, Doug and Joe. How are you guys tonight?
Very well. And ladies and gentlemen, the owner of AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, that's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, Christian-owned, veteran-owned. This is the man behind the name AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com. There.
Tonight I would just like to share a poem by Helen Steiner Rice called The Bend in the Road. And this poem is for everyone out there that needs an encouraging word, and for all of our veterans, our brethren out there who are dealing with the VA, who are hurting and who are in pain and need an encouraging word as well. Sometimes the road of life seems long as we travel through the years. And with a heart that's broken and eyes brim full of tears, we falter in our weariness and sink beside the way. But God leans down and whispers, "Child, there'll be another day, and the road will grow much smoother and much easier to face. So do not be disheartened. This is just a resting place. When you feel you've got nothing left to give, when you're sure that the song has ended, when the day seems over and the shadows fall and the darkness of night has descended, where can you go to find the strength to valiantly keep on trying? Where can you find the hand that will dry the tears the heart is crying? There is but one place to go, and that is to God. And dropping all your pretense and pride, you can pour out your problems without restraint and gain strength with Him at your side. And together you stand at life's crossroads and view what you thought was the end. But God has a much bigger vision, and He tells you it's only a bend. For the road goes on and is smoother, and the pause in the song was just a rest, and the part that's unsung and unfinished is the sweetest and the richest and the best. So rest and relax and grow stronger. Let go and let God share your load. Your work is not finished or ended. You've just come to a bend in the road.
Amen, brother. What a wonderful, an uplifting and wonderful poem. Helen Steiner Rice. Wow.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Chance.
Yeah.
My pleasure. God bless you. And I hope that it encourages others out there that are listening, that are hurting, that are confused, that are in pain, and know what's going on in the world right now and don't know what to do. Just go to God. Give your pain, give your suffering, give your fear over to Him, and you'll be blessed by it.
Indeed. Chance, I can't let you go. I cannot let you go without you telling the audience perhaps what the buy of the week might be, or the buy of the weekend might be.
Actually, I tell you, we just launched today because of the demand. So many folks called me and said, "Look, we're vegetarians, and although we like the trading post, we can't eat, any meat products." So we came up with a vegetarian meat pack, and you'll see it online. Just type in vegetarian in the search bar. It's a closeout, and fortunately or unfortunately, we only have 7 of those left. So it's a fantastic price, $79 for 6 full number 10 cans of food. That's quite a few servings for $79. I think it comes out to 29 cents a serving. So that's one to take advantage of. And the Prospector Pack, as silver rises, that's another great one to look at as well. But this is not about that. I just want all folks out there who are hurting and in pain, please just know that you'll find rest with the Lord. And for my veteran brethren out there, and Jack, this goes to you. Listen, brother, we're there for you, and we love you.
God bless you, my friend. Thank you.
Amen.
Good night.
Good night, sir.
Good chance.
Well, there's a lot of hurting people out there, Joe.
Yeah, there are. And as things get more uncertain in the world, and as news flares up and we see things happening, it's going to get worse for people.
And my final statement is this, folks. Again, I just want to remind everyone, and Catherine Austin Fitz said this, and I've said this before, we were born for this moment in time. We all have a purpose to serve. We have to play our position, listen to what that purpose is, what the instruction is. And as long as you are a part of this program, we consider you a part of our family. And I know that sounds trite, that sounds hollow, maybe. It's not. You're in our prayers and you're in our thoughts. And even if you're alone, we're there with you. And we appreciate you listening to our program. And that's a heartfelt message from me. And I just want to thank Chance as well for sharing that poem from Helen Steiner Rice.
Yeah, and for another great week, don't forget to tune in tomorrow to a two-part Saturday edition of the Weekend Vigilante and Hagmann Hagmann Report. First is Tom Horn, Sheila, and I, and after that is WV and my father. And then Sunday we'll be on with Brother Marcus at 9 p.m. on Pine Ridge Warriors here on Blog Talk Radio. That'll be Sunday, July 20th, 9 p.m. with Brother Marcus, Curtis, my dad, and myself on 9 p.m. here on Blog Talk Radio. So check the website for the links. We will keep you updated. And till we speak again, God bless, stay safe, and have a great weekend.